All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is September 14th of 2022. It is Wednesday here, and we have a new face on the show for Office Hours here today. I'm joined with Andrew here on today's show. Andrew recently joined the SaberSim team, I think maybe around a month ago, or how long's it been, Andrew?
Like 2 weeks.
Okay, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Yeah. So Andrew has joined our team. He's one of the new coaches here. So we're continuing to grow, not only building new features, adding to the product, adding new sports and models and things like that, but also adding our team that is working to help you guys continue to get better at DFS, continue to get better at using SaberSim. So we've brought Andrew on here as a new coach. So he'll be on with me for probably most of these office hours going forward, at least for the next couple weeks, getting him familiar here and hearing his takes on some of these questions. I've mentioned it before on some of these streams that I think it's just going to be really awesome to have a different perspective, a different opinion on some of these things. Even after yesterday's show, there were a couple questions that after Andrew and I synced up, and he had a different perspective, a different take on some of the things that I said, and I think that's great. I think that's really healthy for the ecosystem anyway, to hear some different opinions and things like that. So we'll go ahead and just start diving in here shortly. For those that maybe are tuning into this for the very first time, for your first office hours stream, first of all, welcome. And if you have no idea what's going on, this is a live stream we do every Monday through Friday, 2:00 Eastern, where we answer questions from the community about how to use SaberSim to build better DFS lineups. So if you have questions you would like to ask Andrew and I here, you can post them in YouTube chat or the Office Hours channel in Discord. And of course, if you catch the recorded version of this show or the podcast version of this show, you can email us, support@sabersim.com, with any questions that you have. But let's go ahead and just dive
really
into
quick,
it.
Jordan, just wanted to say,
What's up?
Thank you for the introduction, and just happy to be here, happy to be part of the team, and looking forward to, just bouncing ideas off of each other and having some good DFS conversations. So
yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate the welcome messages in the chat as well.
Yeah, chat is excited here. Rogue, Shady Advice, Matt. We're all very excited for Andrew to be joining the team here. We've got a few questions. We'll just go ahead and start knocking these out here. Let's see. So there was a question yesterday here about NFL stacking. I think this is a good place to start. Good opportunity to talk about some stack rules. So we'll actually bounce away from the MLB here. But question says, how do I set a rule to prevent QB and running back from the same team? Thanks. I'll go ahead and do a quick demo of how you would go about doing this. I think the easiest thing to do would be to set an advanced stacking rule that basically you can say, hey, I only want my QBs paired with, wide receivers or tight ends in my different builds here. So that would be in the rules section of the build settings here. I like to use an advanced stacking rule, lets you be a little bit more specific with the positions. And from here, you would basically just say, I want a quarterback, and then tell us what you want to pair him with, right? So you don't want to run a quarterback and a running back on the same team. Maybe you want 2 wide receivers / a tight end in that build. And that will prevent the quarterback from being paired with a running back. But Andrew, I'm curious your stance on this overall. Do you typically like to play your quarterbacks with running backs? What do some of your NFL stacks look like?
I don't have a huge negative preference against playing them with my running back, especially running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. I mean, I get a little concerned when we get in the QB +3, QB +4 territory, but other than that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I would generally agree. I think people tend to underestimate how strong that correlation could be, especially with some of the backs that get a lot of targets. I mean, we saw, last week, Saquon Barkley get 7 targets, be very involved in the passing game. Javonte Williams had 12 targets.
I think both Jets running backs had 10 targets. I think Breece Hall had 10 and Michael Carter had 11.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, probably partially because Joe Flacco can't get the ball more than 15 yards down the field anymore. But I mean, No, for sure. So I would say, be cautious with this kind of thing. One other thing I want to add is, because we're simulating out the games and we have an understanding of what running backs are involved in the passing attack, you'll see different correlations for different running backs depending on how strong that relationship is. We see CMC has almost a 0.30 or has a 0.30 correlation with Baker. And those correlations are taken into account when you're building your lineups, right? That's what this correlation slider controls. So that is how you do it. I would probably push back on the need to do this. I typically leave this for what it is worth. The stacking rule that I typically end up using, depending on the slate, depending on the week, but most of the time I will prefer to do something like this and allow my quarterback to be prepared with like 1 to 3 pass catchers, running back, wide receiver, or tight end, depending on the team. So anything else to add on there, Andrew, before we move us on?
No, I'm good.
Cool. Okay, so we have a contest selection here, a contest selection question from Neil. I do also see some questions coming in YouTube chat, which is awesome. We always start this show answering the questions that have been asked in Discord. So we'll start there. If you're not already in our Discord community, first of all, as well, there is a link to join in the description of every past office hours show. It's probably in the description of this one, actually, right now. I just added it to our default descriptions there. So you should be able to get into Discord there. But this question says, NFL contest selection question, thoughts on whether to prioritize the $4.20 max with a little under 15,000 entries, or the $3 play action, which has under 500,000 entries. The $4 also has a flatter payout structure. 20 max contests are listed as a diversifier. Not sure if I should group these contests in the same bucket. Yeah, I'll jump on this one first again here. So this is definitely one of those things where, because the NFL lobby can be so diverse and different, that our DFS profit plan maybe requires a little bit of massaging to make it like work perfectly for you here. If you were following that DFS profit plan strictly, it would tell you just play the $3 play action before playing this $4.20 max. But I think the play action has, like 500,000 entries. It is a much, much bigger contest compared to this $4, which might be a little bit easier to realize your edge more quickly. I would have no problem. I would say this probably falls a little bit more on the personal tolerance or like personal preference side of things as it fits into your contest portfolio. If you want to have a shot at just a massive payday and want that kind of sweat, I think the play action makes some sense there. I also, if maybe if you're already taking some other shots in the rest of your contest portfolio, maybe the $4 does make a little bit more sense there. My lean, I think I would probably target the $4 first, just because I think it's just way easier to win that or be competitive in that on a more frequent basis. But Andrew, your thoughts here on where of these you would enter your money in first if they were like the next contest you were filling out? Yeah,
I mean, I guess it just comes down to the huge contests that we see in football season. Because I mean, a $4.20 max with 15K entries is what you see every day in baseball, and
exactly,
you don't think twice about it, right? Considering it a diversifier. So I would say I'm in agreement with you that it is personal preference. My preference would be to play the $3 just because my long-term ROI would be so much better with so huge of entries. So, your competition is probably negative EV at some point, as opposed to the people playing the $4.20 max, and the negative EV field is going to want that bigger payday.
Yes.
So I would definitely play that contest first myself. But, like you said, you have 20 entries and 500,000, even if you are really good, it's still going to take you a long time to realize that. So I could see the merit for playing either of those.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and again, I do think that the field in that $3 is just going to be significantly softer. The very soft casual NFL DFS field might not even know that $4 is there. So right. Yeah, definitely a good point there. I'll quickly touch on this. I feel like I'm doing a little bit too much spill in the beans here on these streams recently. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but In It to Binkit had said, caught a mention of you talking about a new diversifier tool as part of SaberSim in a recent office hours. Could you expand on exactly what this is? Very quickly, what our goal is there is to basically kind of give you a quick auto diversification of your pool in the post build process. So you could build some lineups and you could say, I kind of want to balance risk versus upside as best as possible from this pool. We are kicking around and working on the idea of building something like that. So again, I think I've been talking a little bit about some of these upcoming features in too much detail here on recent streams. So I don't want to. I want to build a little bit of hype. I want to build a little bit of excitement, but don't want to give too much away ahead of time. So we'll leave it at that for that one, and just go ahead and move us on. Real quickly here. So this is another question. This was from Luca. It's also about a stack rule. Different one here, though. He said, I would like to set a rule where if I get it, the only position I want paired with my defense is a running back. Occasionally, I was getting a wide receiver. Thank you. So similar rule here, basically. What we'll do is we'll do another advanced stacking rule. And you can actually have both of these rules here. So we'll just create another rule. And this time, we are just going to say we always want to pair our running back with our defense and to include no other positions in that rule. So there's never a wide receiver, right? Wide receivers are equal to 0. We'll never pair a running back. We'll never pair a wide receiver plus a defense. I'll recommend caution there. Again, I think running backs and defenses do have a relatively strong correlation to one another. We'll see, Jonathan Taylor has his strongest correlation actually with his own same team defense. But defenses are not very often negatively correlated with any players on their own team. There's not really any reason to believe that Michael Pittman, for example, is negatively correlated with the Colts, at least per our simmed correlation data. So I would just, probably a net neutral kind of thing here on your EV. But I don't know.
I think one thing I'd say is that reading this question, it sounds like they want more of a conditional rule, which I know you've talked about in the past. It's like, if this were to happen, then I only want it this way, as opposed to like putting an advanced stacking rule and having it in every lineup.
Gotcha.
I do agree with you that I think that like a wide receiver and their defense is like the negative correlation isn't significant enough to like write a rule for that. And maybe down the road we'll have like a conditional rule for that. But I think that what they're talking about is we would be being a little too forceful with the advanced stacking rule.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So not necessarily always pair my running back with my defense, but don't pair any positions that are not. I wonder, there might be a way we could still. Yeah, I get you. Okay, yeah. So conditional rules are coming. So you could say something like, just don't. I guess, okay, so one thing you could do, and this would be a big, I think this would take a lot of time relative to how much you got out of it, but you could potentially create groups here with the groups that we already have built and say something like Colts, just because that was, again, the first one that came to mind, and like Pittman and, actually, no, you would do something like that and say like only one. Right. You could potentially do, but you would have to go through and then less than 2, I guess, would work in this case, but it would be a lot of work. I don't know if you get a lot out of that, but yeah, more conditional groups of like, if this, then follow this rule are coming. That's actually the big main feature. Here I go again, talking about new features, but that's the main thing that we're working on right now.
No, and I think what you just showed is a good workaround in the meantime, and it does work. And if somebody wants to take the time and if it's of value to them, then, they can totally do that.
And the one other thing too is, you don't necessarily have to feel like you need to do this ahead of time for every single team and every single player combination. Run a build without any of that stuff in there. And if you're finding that a particular defense is getting paired with the same team receiver or tight end or something like that, too much for your liking, then you could go back and group those players out, remove them, and run another build and go from there. So that might be.
And you can also see that using the filters, right? We can click on a defense and see how often that wide receiver or any wide receiver is paired with the defense from our filters in a build.
Yep, absolutely. So cool. Let's keep it going here. interesting theory question here, or maybe more of a math question from Rogue. And says, I was explaining SaberSim to a curious friend last night. He asked a really good theoretical/hypothetical question. If there was a contest that was scaled up to allow 1,500 entries, what would you say is the probability that both the winning and or optimal lineup is created in the pool of lineups if the user was to build with default sliders and no adjustments and defaults and a curated player pool? So basically, you're building 1,500 lineups on purely default settings, and you can get to play 1,500 lineups into a contest. What is the probability of you having the winning lineup there? Do you want to take the first stab at this one, Andrew?
Well, I guess the first thing you need to know is what type of contest is it, right? I mean, is this a showdown? Is this a 13-game main slate? Because the difference, there'd be some difference there, but I think even then, the likelihood that you build optimal is still very low because there's just so many lineups you can create in any given contest format. I think 1,500 is a good stab at it, but I don't think that it's enough to like build the optimal every single time.
Yeah, I will just throw a guess out there that that probability is probably very, very, very low. Given how many possible lineups that you can actually make, even in something like Showdown, and how small of the slice 1,500 is. If you even had, a 50% chance at that, just throwing a number out, I mean, there are plenty of contests to play in most lobbies where you could get 1,500 unique lineups in play if you had a large enough bankroll to support it. If you had the winning lineup in that, or the optimal, or whatever you want to call it, 50% of the time, I mean, you would bank every other night. And there are certainly players playing that much action that are not doing that. I mean, there are NFL Showdown alone, at least hundreds of thousands of viable lineup combinations. MLB main slate, like well into the millions. So I think the goal more is that lineup, that 1,500 lineup pool, it has more than its fair share of first place equity compared to any random set of 1,500 lineups. Not like that 1,500 lineup pool itself is always going to contain that top overall.
And it looks like Rogue has some additional comments here.
Yeah. So he said, so one with default settings and one with a more curated pool. So talking about two different builds here, and then said we were talking about the main slate, MLB and NFL. More so, how often does the winning lineup get built with defaults right out of the box? So, I mean, I would say, with thinking about these as two different builds, obviously, when we start talking about actually making changes, it's going to depend on the quality of those changes, right? I mean, if you curate a pool in a way that, I know this is kind of circular a little bit, but if you curate the pool and end up with like a better set of players in your player pool, you're going to increase the quality of your lineup pool as a result. But you can make that worse as well by eliminating good plays. Again, I mean, referring to main slates, there are so many possible lineups that you can make. Like, I think the expectation of how often do you have a lineup that could ship the flagship GPP, for example, in your pool of 1,500 should probably be, I don't know, tempered or pretty low. If you, again, somebody asked this very similar question yesterday and basically said, like, why am I not getting the optimal for an NFL Showdown in my 1,500? And what I said yesterday is if you would ship every 10 slates just purely based on getting your random 150 out of 1,500. So I don't know. Andrew, any other thoughts that you have on this?
I mean, I would say, if you can correctly curate a player pool, it'll help. But other than that, no.
Okay.
Nothing.
Yeah, let's move on. I think it's an interesting theoretical question. Shady's chiming in here and said, if you want a rule of thumb, I'd guess 1.05 times 1.1x the expected value of the field. And I think that is like a realistic number. I almost coming at it from the same point as the way I think about top 1% equity, that like an elite player is going to put, maybe 2% of their lineups into the top 1% of their contest. You are 2xing your potential, like your implied probability there. But that's still a very low probability event of taking place anyway. So I think that number sounds about right as a baseline, but
and then Rogue said, yeah, don't fret. Thanks for asking, answering. So we'll take our best stab at it. And these theoretical questions are always fun to think about and talk about out loud for sure.
Yeah, no, some of my favorite shows here that I've had are where somebody throws something like that at me, and then we get to get to talk about it for a while. And now I'm glad to have a second take here, so I don't get totally lost in my own head on this. But quickly, Nipsey said, have you ever guys thought of ever doing a subs only weekly office hours? I don't know if, a specific like behind the paywall stream is something we've really kicked around. We do part of like the whole point of like bringing Andrew onto the team here and continuing to grow this part of our team is to allow us to do more content, do more shows, maybe target some other angles at it. I know people are always very interested in more slate specific kind of content, which is something we've shied away from a little bit more in the past. That's something we could start looking at a little bit more. So yeah, definitely all that kind of stuff is on the table. Clint here asked who was our co-host. For those that missed the very beginning of the stream, this is Andrew, recently joined the SaberSim team as one of our new coaches here. So get used to seeing Andrew in the streams and in Discord and things like that going forward. So cool. A couple other quick, very quick questions that we can hit here. Carry Out Cole had said for the mini max competition, do we have to max it to qualify? Yes, you do. You do need to play 150 lineups to participate in the weekly max challenge. And you know what? It's been a minute since I brought this up here, so let's go ahead and pull it up, especially as we approach another Sunday here. For those that don't already know about this, we did this last year, doing it again this year. If you wear the SaberSim logo, fill out this very short form here just to give us some information and max out the mini max on the NFL Sunday main slate, you are eligible to win some awesome prizes. If you are the top overall finisher for a given week, you get a free month of SaberSim, you get a SaberSim t-shirt, and you get an entry to play in a $5,000 free roll at the end of the season. And just for participating for 10 weeks or even all 18 weeks, you get some awesome stuff, free SaberSim, Yeti gear, and some other things like that. So I just dropped the link into YouTube chat so you guys can go pull this up, get the form, read more about the prizes. But for those that aren't aware of this, definitely want to put this on your radar because it is literally free stuff for playing NFL DFS, just like you are going to be doing anyway on Sunday. So,
and one thing I love that we added this year was the 10-week prize. Because I mean, sometimes you're busy, life things happen, whatever it is, and adding that is a just nice little touch.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we're heading into week 2 here. So 18 weeks is unfortunately off the table for some people out there, but the 10-week prizes are still out there.
Right. So if you miss it, you still get in.
Yeah. 400 Runner says we need to get you a new mic, Andrew. We are planning on getting Andrew all of the tech stuff, the mic, the camera, the things like that. But I had to have him on today. We were talking about office hours yesterday after that stream, and I was like, you know what? Let's get Andrew on there. It's time. So.
Do I sound that bad, Jordan?
No, it doesn't sound that bad. I actually think you sound pretty crisp. But I don't know. Maybe 400 Runner equipment. Yeah. He must have you playing through the laptop speakers or something like that. So let's go ahead. Let's hop over to YouTube chat to get to some of the questions here. Let's see. Mabaran said Mechanicsburg question. Interesting. When exporting lineups, does the order they export perfectly match the order they're showing up in the app? Have a use case where it would be nice to have the lineup number as a field when pulling out lineups. They should, yes. So they will export. I actually know that they do because I've done a little bit of this on my own. So they will export in the order that they are ranked here. So especially if you're making use of this here to sort by projected score or Saber score or something, different sorting methods, and then exporting, they will export in that order. In terms of adding more information to the lineups as they are exported, I know I sound like a broken record here, but that is also something else that is very much on our roadmap. I know there are a lot of people out there that have DFS processes where they're building a big pool of lineups and then just exporting it and deciding what lineups they're going to play in Excel or in some other thing that they've built for themselves. And having things like Saber score and projected score and ownership and, even salary or rank or all of the information we show you here would be helpful in that CSV. That is something we want to do in the future. So, and then me Barron said, mechanics, not Mechanicsburg. I was wondering what exactly.
I didn't know what that meant either.
Yeah. Let's see. Interesting question here from Uncrabby Crab. He said, since Jordan plays a very diverse pool of lineups, can Andrew show us a more boom or bust style of creating lineups? I won't force that on you here, Andrew. But I'm curious, do you want to give kind of an overview, I guess, if that makes sense, almost of the way that you kind of think about your overall process when it comes time to build?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say, from talking with you and watching your videos here and how you talk, we do build a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
I am a little more aggressive in my takes, in my exposures. And as a direct circumstance of that, I choose to play a lower percent of my bankroll.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have the profit plan 2.5 to 5%. I'm more around 2 to 3%. Max.
Yeah.
But that's because I will take much bigger stands and I will duplicate lineups in different contests rather than playing a unique contest and a unique lineup in every contest. So I just think that there's nothing wrong with that approach, and you just need to be a little more careful when taking it.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that's great. Again, I know everybody that has watched this show a lot over the past year or so has gotten very familiar with what I do. But it is not the only way to do things. There are so many different diverse ways to use SaberSim and to build good lineups. So I think it'll be awesome to have some unique takes. And maybe if we have a little bit of time towards the end of this year, we can do, I don't know, it might be kind of fun to just try a practice build for tonight's baseball slate and just kind of see where we both end up or something like that. So
yeah, sounds fun.
Cool. C.S. Harrell said, I noticed when building lineups, the default slider positions change from slate to slate. Does SaberSim make adjustments based on certain slate attributes, or is it automatically adjusted somehow? So really good question here. So it is adjusted only on one slate attribute, and that is slate size at the moment. If you are interested in learning more about how those sliders have been set and how they were back tested, we actually just recently updated them and recorded all of our internal conversations as we worked through that process to get there as a part of our Behind the Sims podcast. So we got really good feedback on this particular one. I think people really enjoyed this. There is I think it is an 8 episode series for this particular one of starting from ground zero to reback testing the sliders to ultimately the new slider settings. And at the moment, they are responsive and they are dynamic to the size of the slate. But that's it in terms of slate attributes. We have talked about here, and I think this is a really interesting way for us to go down, the idea of having almost slate archetypes, where, you may say for a baseball slate, a DraftKings baseball slate may not only just be a 12-game slate, but it may also be a 12-game slate where the two highest projected pitchers are both above 10K, or the both two highest projected owned pitchers are above 10K, or there's no team total over 6 runs, or these different archetypes that could actually influence the way an optimal strategy plays out. That obviously is quite a wormhole to go down, but it's something we've kicked around there as an idea. So,
and I think last night was a great example, right? You saw Jacob deGrom at 70+% owned across the board.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, so what is the optimal strategy there in terms of dealing with that ownership, or what is the optimal strategy in terms of how you might want to spread out your stacks? All things that we're thinking about. I would say, it could be an interesting idea or an interesting way to add some of your own value or opinion to the process there. If you are finding, on last night's slate, for example, if you are eating the DeGrom chalk, and the default ownership fade slider is also leading you to play some more chalky stacks, maybe that is a situation where at the very least you're upping the ownership fade slider to get off of some of that, or maybe you're just making some stands in the post build process to fade some of the chalkier stacks since you're eating so much of the DeGrom chalk there. But
and Jordan, just to clarify, our sliders are the same across different sites, right? So DraftKings and FanDuel would be the same.
Yep, they are.
So that could be a way for people to add value, especially with the different type of lineup constructions where you're playing one pitcher on FanDuel, and on DraftKings you have to play two pitchers. So that's something to take into account.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. Let's keep it going here. Crypto Shoney said Jordan just talks louder. Yeah, I am a bit of a loud talker here. I am notorious for disrupting people nearby when I'm doing these streams here. So maybe I just need to quiet down. But
I just got to learn to speak louder. That's all. I'll get the hang of it.
Yeah. Next step, we went from having one person doing office hours. Now we have two. I think step 3 will be getting an actual proper producer here for this show to maybe help us out with some of that kind of stuff. So Aaron said, how do you guys feel about groups in NFL Showdown? I know how I feel. What are your thoughts? I'll let you go first on this one, Andrew.
Well, I want to know how you feel first.
Okay. All right. I feel strongly about this. I really, really very much recommend avoiding creating groups and restrictions on the builder in NFL Showdown unless you just simply can't get the kinds of lineups that you like any other way. And if that's the case, I'd tell you to exercise some caution about taking that particular approach on the slate. The main reason why is because of just the way that the SaberSim builder works for Showdown. So since we're building lineups on 0-0-10 settings, the sliders here, your pool of lineups is basically it is a pool of optimal lineups for the way that the slate could play out. We're using a single sim to generate each lineup, building the best possible lineup for that given sim. When you start creating groups, so if you come in here and you say, well, I don't want to play Mahomes, Captain, and Herbert in the same lineup, right? Which, that might make some sense from a duplication standpoint. But what is actually happening there on the SaberSim side is we will take a sim where Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert might be optimal together and instead tell the builder to build the next best possible lineup it can. But that lineup's not actually optimal for that sim anymore. So you may have a weaker overall lineup as a result of that. I would recommend instead spending more of your energy making these kinds of adjustments in the post-build process, where maybe you are pairing up, you're using the filters to look at your lineups that include Mahomes and have Herbert as a flex, and then eliminating those lineups, because then what's happening is you're just sorting through your pool to find already existing optimals where that construction just doesn't show up. It's kind of a very technical answer here, but I think it's very, very important. And it's something I do feel pretty strongly about here. So I don't use any of that. I don't really set almost any restrictions on my builds for NFL Showdown at all. But your thoughts?
I think that, if you have groups in mind, maybe write them down and the players that you're looking to separate, and rather than make like a blunt rule across the board, like sit there and like scroll through your lineups and see what they're looking like. And you can also use the filters to see how often those combinations come up. You could filter for those lineups and then scroll through those specific ones and like put a game script together. Or if you don't like the game script, then exclude it.
Yeah. And for example, just to like reiterate what I was saying here, if we go through and we say, okay, like Joshua Palmer is going to be a very chalky play this week. I know our ownership projection for him is somewhat low right now, but maybe that's our stance. Eliminating Palmer captain lineups here basically just fills in another new set of 20 from our original 500, where in that sim, Josh Palmer was not optimal. If you eliminate him before the build, you are saying take all of the sims that we would have used anyway, but now the builder just doesn't get to use that player in the captain spot, and it may have to build a lineup that otherwise doesn't really make as much sense and is no longer built on a single sim optimal. So another question on this game coming up here, Patrick said, if Keenan Allen is officially ruled out, how much of a significant boost do the playmakers get? I see that Josh Palmer gets a boost. Where do you think extra targets will go to? Tight ends. To be completely honest, the models team puts in a ton of work here to make these kinds of adjustments. Andrew, you're a little bit more plugged into like what those guys are doing on a daily basis and making some of the manual adjustments we do behind the scenes. Maybe you have a better idea on this question than I do about how we're handling some of these injuries or unknown situations like this.
Yeah, no, the models team does a great job, and they're just very, very thorough. Obviously, it's an unknown situation. We
Mhm.
try and predict it the best we can, but if you see something online, coach's quote, some type of news where it's pointing you in a direction that the sim is not, then that's a perfect opportunity to make a manual adjustment if you think you have
Mhm.
an angle.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing I would add there too is embrace the variance. A lot of times you see, whether it's because of the way that like different projection models are all in agreement or something like that, or how something happened in the previous game. This is a situation that is inherently high variance, where that player's usage is going to go, especially this early in the season. If the field starts gravitating or starts acting as if that is a very certain thing, like it is Josh Palmer takes up all that usage, or takes up most of that usage, and that's the end of it, and his ownership is much higher than any of these other Chargers guys. I would, especially in an NFL showdown slate, I would lean more on the side of just hoping that people are kind of wrong about that, or the situation is a little more murky than expected, and playing the lower owned guy. I don't think anybody besides maybe the coach of the Chargers could tell you right now with 100% accuracy where that usage is going to go. Whether it's, maybe Mike Williams gets a ton of action even after he had one target on Sunday. So
Right. I think you hit it on the head when you said it's so early in the season,
mhm.
and so many of these things are unknown. Like the Cam Akers, Daryl Henderson situation, nobody knew how that was going to play out. And that's like completely flipped on its head going into week 2. So there are just a lot of unknowns. Like you said, embrace the variance and try and take some angles that other people aren't.
And my first, since you brought up the Rams running back, my first idea there is to take the opposite approach now this week. I mean, it seriously looks like Darrell Henderson Jr. might be like 25 to 30% owned, at least with early ownership projections. I just partially refuse to believe that backfield is just settled. Like we just know now it's Darrell Henderson is the guy, Cam Akers is the backup, and it's just end of story. I feel like that there's still more to come there, and I'm already we'll see how things shake out, but I'm already eyeing Darrell Henderson Jr. fade for this week.
Can't blame you. It's a good thought.
Yeah. Cool. Mark said, is the profit plan percentage the same for NFL as in baseball, 2.5 to 5%? I think that's still a good heuristic. I think that's a good place to work from. I would say for NFL, especially if you're playing in much larger contests, and also given that your sample size, if you're just playing main slates all season, is going to be so much smaller. I think it's probably wise to lean on the lower side of that. As a result of that, but I think it still works for a decent heuristic. Andrew, you mentioned that you're a little bit more conservative with your bankroll than I am as a part of your overall strategy. Do you make adjustments to your like daily wager differently in NFL as you do in baseball?
Well, we only been through 1 week this season, but I'd say like for baseball, since it's daily, I'll try and stay on the lower end of the spectrum, and then for football, I'm okay jumping closer to that higher end of the spectrum, especially like for main slates. But for showdowns, they're so variant, I stay pretty low.
Gotcha. Cool.
So just use it as like a range.
Yeah, and that's also the one other thing I'll add there is you can also incorporate your perceived edge in those sports. Like if you feel like you are much better at NFL or MLB or whatever, adjust the bankroll that you're playing accordingly. I think baseball. I think both of those sports are pretty good sports for me, but golf. Some of the newer sports we've added models to this past year, NASCAR and tennis are all things that I'm still kind of, figuring out, and my like longer term ROI is a little bit lower in those sports. So that's one where, I would definitely be on the lower side of that, depending on how good at the sport I think I am. So Jay asked an interesting question here, said, enjoying the lineup review option. Any plans to integrate back testing within the tool for end users? For instance, a lineup rewind or study. I mean, it's definitely something that we could build out here in the future. I would be curious, what would you, Jay, talking to you here, what would you like want to see in a feature like that? Like if there's something that would be particularly useful to to view in a kind of lineup rewind or lineup study tool, that would be awesome for us to hear. You can add that kind of stuff. We have a wish list channel set up in our Discord. I know there's a bit of a recurring joke that is just a hole that we never look at, but we honestly do take that kind of stuff into consideration in terms of building out our roadmap. So fire away in there. Andrew, one thing, I don't really do a ton of slate to slate review here when it comes to my process. I know this is something that's gotten asked of me a lot in office hours, and I've never really felt like I have a compelling answer to it. Is that something that you do on even like a daily or a weekly basis of going back and looking at past lineups and reviewing the slate?
It depends. Like if I took like a really strong take or went against the model, I will, but otherwise not so often. I have like gone back and like dug through CSVs. So like I have the ability to do that, but it's very time consuming, and I don't think that the juice is worth the squeeze.
Gotcha. Sounds like you have like a very angry beehive in your house or something there.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the neighbors. I can't.
Gotcha. No problem. Ryan says, I was looking at your projections and ETRs, and it seems like SaberSim was below by 10% on average. Is there a reason why you would be lower across the board? I don't have like a first instinct answer to why that would be. I would say we do have, and this is maybe again something where Andrew, you can provide a little bit more clarity here, but we do have backstops or go ahead. I'll just let you answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd be curious to know what like sport, but we do have like procedures in place, and our models team does review how we match up against just the industry and make sure like we're not way off anywhere. So
yeah. Gotcha. And I'll add to that and say, we have backstops and kind of guide rails in place for all of our models where we'll get alerts and things that fire if we are far off from, some other projections, or even Vegas is a big one too. So I would say, especially for kind of, our big main competitors and Vegas, if there is a discrepancy where you're seeing we are off, I think it is safe to say that we are aware of that. And we are conscious of that decision, that is not that's not something we're blind to. There are situations where, we might be off from Vegas on a particular game. I know there were a few things like that. That is always something that we are aware of, and basically kind of making the conscious decision to take a stand there on the projections. I think it's important to remember too that there is still, DFS has come a long way. I think 5 years ago, the projection or the informational edge was enormous and sometimes all you needed to be successful. And I think now we've come so far, just like in terms of the game theory of this game, that people sometimes I think forget that there are still projection edges and informational edges out there. And we believe that we have the best models for at least particularly the big three sports that are available out there. And we are comfortable kind of putting our putting our money on that and saying, no, like we think we're right on this game or this environment. So anyway, but good question there. JWH said soccer projections ever a possibility? Yes. I think soccer sims is something that we do want to unleash the models team on in the future. It is from what I've understood talking to those guys, it is going to be a pretty complicated sport. Sports that are very continuous and sports that have less frequent events like soccer can be harder to kind of break up into a sim in a rational play-by-play way. But I know it's commonly requested and something that we would want to add in the future. So, cool. Let's see. I think we are mostly caught up on questions here. I think we have a little bit of time. Maybe we take a little bit of a look at the slate tonight, the main slate, and see how things are looking. Cool. Let's go ahead and pull it up. If anybody else has other questions, I guess this is a very quick one here. Patrick says, how do we get alerts on Discord that a sim has been completed for a game or slate? If you right click let me actually double check this. If you right click the channel on your computer, there's a section that says notification settings, and you can basically say, notify me for all messages. Keep in mind, you'll get a lot of notifications, but if you want a sim alert for every sim that runs for baseball or something like that, that's how you'd go about doing it. So
I'd be cautious with that one.
Yeah, it might be sim overload. I think that's the easiest way to do it. There might be, maybe a better a Discord wizard than me might be able to tell you a way to like set up notifications that like only send you a notification if the word like completed is used. That would just show you if like sims completed, which could be useful. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the slate. I mean, I guess, first things first, Andrew, I'd be curious, just like what you sit down, you haven't looked at a slate yet at all that particular day. What are you looking at? Like, what are the things that are first important to you in terms of like your research and just overall getting like familiarized with a baseball slate?
I mean, first thing I want to know, like who's pitching, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know who are like the high team total games. I'll check Vegas in case, we're taking a stand some places. Is it a Coors slate? Is, Jacob deGrom pitching? It looks like we have Burns. This is the first time I'm looking at today's slate. I haven't looked at it at all. But I just want to get a feel for the slate, maybe run a test build, see who SaberSim's liking, and I'll usually check out ownership based by salary. So that's where I start.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, similar deal for me. I've mentioned before here. A lot of times I like to look at salary. I think that's kind of a useful scale here, and just flip salary from top to bottom and look and see almost in salary tiers how I think lineups are going to kind of start to fit together, especially with the pitchers. I think we can talk more about stacks in a second, but it'll give you an idea of where even like some leverage spots start to open up immediately. We see at this like 9K plus 10K plus range, I think Corbin Burns could dominate the ownership on this particular slate. We have Cortez in a not a great matchup or not a great park. Looks like going to be very low owned and pretty low projected for 10K. Rasmussen, who's obviously been very good recently, but all the way up at 9.6. I think people are going to be a little bit scared to get there. All kind of just start looking at how this breaks out, and also the value pitchers, right? Where people are going to go for value. I think in particular, this is where I start to see my fades potentially coming together, like cheaper pitchers that project, a bit better than their, the other players in a similar salary range are where I start to think about, like, I'm immediately interested in some Oakland stacks if we do get Dane Dunning as the consensus chalky value pitcher. So,
I think sometimes people just don't know where to go, and ownership just gets concentrated for like not the best reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm totally against, possibly taking a stand if I'll ask SaberSim, run a build and see what the model thinks and make a conclusion from there.
Cool. Yeah, let's run a test build here since you mentioned it. Another thing that I frequently like to do, we'll do just 500 lineups for now to keep it simple. I guess I kind of went pretty quick there, but Andrew, anything different that you do in terms of setting up your test build? I typically just like to do 150 max, like 10 to 50K, kind of imagining the flagship or the mini max or something like that. What does a test build mean to you when you run one of these?
I'll run a couple different builds just to see. I'll like run at default settings for the contest that I'm playing. I'll run one with no ownership fade to see just like in a vacuum with correlation who does SaberSim like not fading anybody. Sometimes I run it without correlation, like a standard research build 0010, like we've talked about.
Yeah.
So I'll run it from a couple of different angles, and I'm just trying to get more information out of the model. Like, well, if not this, then that. If that, then this, and see like if we take certain things away, what does it think? And I'll try and draw conclusions from there.
Gotcha. So we've got a test build pulled up here. Talk me through some of the first things that you'd be interested in like looking at here in your first test build.
Well, first thing I want to see is the pull exposure on the right.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go. Yeah. So looking at that, Can you filter by exposure instead of
Yeah.
pool?
Yep. Sorry.
I want to see how like they match up. So sometimes here, or even sometimes I'll even sort by like leverage. It's like, who are we getting positive leverage on? Who are we getting negative leverage on?
Mhm.
And just kind of jot down, like if it's like the pitchers, jot down their names, or if it's like a specific team, kind of jot down the team
Yeah.
and make notes there. Or sometimes go like the team stacks and see the same thing on the team stacks tab. So I'll usually check out the pitchers. Sometimes individual batters, like if Aaron Judge is like 35% plus owned, and see where we're at on like some of those really high one-offs. So say like team stacks,
Mhm.
pitchers, individual batters. Those are like some places I like to look.
So you had mentioned that like you generally will take some bigger stands and be a little bit more concentrated. Talk me through like what are kind of the steps that you would take to get to one of those stands? Like what would it take for you to kind of figure out if we were actually sitting down to build for this slate? What would the steps be? What would you look at in terms of figuring out like maybe what one of your bigger fades or one of your bigger like positive leverage plays is going to be here?
Yeah, no, good question. I'd say one thing I like to look at is like team ownership.
Mm-hmm.
I'll pull up a team and I'll try and just come up with an approximate team ownership just intuitively.
Gotcha. And from there, like kind of just comparing like how much exposure you're getting to that team relative to how much you think they're going to be owned.
Yeah, so like I would go to like the projections tab and like
Okay.
filter.
Don't worry about the background noise. I know your neighbors
I'm
are
sorry
killing
about
you
it.
here. It's all good. No, I'm more interested in hearing your process here. I think everybody else
So
is too. So
like what's the highest total team?
it looks like
4.8
kind of yeah. It seems like
Yankees.
a lower total kind of night here. We don't have anybody over 5. We have the Yankees at 4.8 and the Dodgers at 4.9.
Yeah. So like I know like in your process you've talked about like, I don't really want anyone over like 30%
Mhm.
like team exposure or things like that. I mean, if I find a team and they're like 20 to 25%
Yeah,
approximate team ownership, but I think they're the best play, like I'm willing to take them like 3x that sometimes.
gotcha.
So I really handle it on like a team by team basis rather than like a across the board rule of ownership.
Gotcha. Makes
But
sense.
one thing I will do in like a situation like that is try and mix up my stack types. So in my build, I'll make sure that like I'm getting enough ownership to 1 through 9 as opposed to just like 1 through 6. So I'll really like constructions where like 6 through 9, maybe I'm getting 2 of them in a stack or something like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great idea. And I think, at times people have asked me, like, is it better to use team stacks or look at individual batter exposures there? And I think that's a really good example of where maybe doing both is important. Like if you've decided, hey, maybe, sometimes what can be a little bit of a signal to me is if I have a team that's showing up in a lot of my stack pool exposure here, but I'm not getting a lot in my top 150, that can be a sign that maybe I want to get there a little bit more, especially if it's a lower owned team. If I'm going out of my way to maybe get some additional Royals in my lineups, it might be a good idea for me to just both bump up their stack exposure and then actually make sure that I'm getting exposure to the Kansas City bats that I actually want to get to, whether that's, getting to lower in the batting order guys, or, sometimes you can see situations like, I bumped up, let's see, let me look at this real quick. So I bumped up that exposure and we see actually one of my most popular Royals bats that's now showing up is Drew Waters, the 8-hole hitter, the projected 8-hole hitter for the Royals, and he's the stone minimum price. Like it probably makes some salary saving sense to get there, but do I want that to be my highest owned bat? Right? Maybe like a little bit more of a raw power hitter like Perez or something like that is the guy I want to be getting to a little bit more, and I could kind of come back here and do some cleanup and make sure that not only am I getting to the stack I want, but I'm also getting to the individual hitters on that stack that I think are the best way to go there.
Yeah, no, I think like your highest exposure teams, it's always worth checking like who you're being exposed to. Because me, I like to build one build for diversifiers and one build for elevators.
Mm-hmm.
And because the ownership fade and the sim variance are lower for the elevators, you will just get so much of the top of the order hitters And I'm not saying that's bad, but when I'm like 50% exposed to Royals and I have no 7 and no 9 hitters in those lineups, I don't like that.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Okay, I think this was like kind of a good quick walkthrough. I see some other questions coming into chat here now, so I think for now let's go ahead and knock these out before we get close to the end of the show here. Interesting one from AC said, if going through a 2 to 3 week rough patch with results, switch it up or trust the process. Your thoughts on this one, Andrew? I'm curious how you kind of think about downswings.
I think it's just not long enough to warrant a switch up, and I think you got to stick it out a little longer than that for sure.
Yeah, 2 to 3 weeks, well within the range of outcomes for a downswing. We did one of our other behind the sims that we did here was to build out that contest selection framework. And in this, let me pick up this playlist here. So this video down here at the bottom, play these GPPs to maximize your DFS profits. This was kind of the last episode in the contest selection behind the sims we did. And one of the things we found doing the research here is that swings, like you should very much expect to have some pretty bad downswings playing DFS. We found that especially for people playing, GPPs only, larger field GPPs, 5 to 8 profitable days a month is basically your expectation. That not even, I'm not even talking about winning. I'm not even talking about a top 1% performance. I'm talking about any profit at all is only going to happen about 5 to 8 days a month. And there were frequently in our sims that we were running, like following a bankroll tracking, playing the DFS profit plan, there are like 15 to 30 day like sequences where you don't make any profit at all. So totally within the range of outcomes. We did have on a past office hours episode here recently. If you go up and search, I think I just called it downswing, or it's mentioned in that video. Interesting old video here of Danny answering that exact question. But also 2 weeks ago, there was somebody that asked about downswings, and I had a lot of time to spend on this particular question. So if you're interested in watching this a little or learning a little bit more here, I'd watch this. I have kind of an exercise that I do when I'm in the midst of a really bad downswing and feeling kind of bad about it, where I scale back down to playing one lineup a night and then slowly build that back up over the next few nights back to my normal volume, which I think can be a very helpful kind of like resetting process. I definitely go check that out if you haven't seen that. Okay, a couple other questions here. Let's see. JWH says, given how ubiquitous optimizers are nowadays, should our approach to being contrarian be trying to think about smart ways to fade optimizers that only factor in median projections? I think it's a really interesting idea. I think there's actually a very interesting way to do this in SaberSim, depending on like how much time you have to do this. But there's two things that I think can be exploited here. One is that most projection models are heavily based on Vegas totals. And two, most people are using, exactly as you mentioned, optimizers that well overvalue average projections. Something that I used to do a lot of, I haven't done as much of it this year, but I think can still be a pretty interesting exercise here, is to go through and actually set the team totals to match Vegas, to kind of mimic what a traditional tool, another projection model might have for these different players, and then build a ton of lineups just on the cash settings with just like a basic stacking rule set. So say like force 5 cash settings, build a ton of lineups, set the team totals to match Vegas. And I think you'll kind of mimic what somebody using like any other optimizer and any other random set of projections out there might get if they just try to say, hey, give me like 5 stacks. I think that can be a pretty creative way of starting to think about where are some exploitable edges there. What do you think? What are your thoughts here, Andrew?
No, I think that's a good way. And, you'll see ownership concentrate on like the best point per dollar plays, especially pitchers, all the time. Like they'll come in even higher than we have them projected. So I'd say don't be afraid to bump them up, their ownership projection up if you think you're seeing that.
Yeah, the other thing I've noticed that you can kind of get out of that as well. So let me actually just quickly hop over to yesterday's FanDuel slate, because I think there was an interesting example of this yesterday. The Yankees and Yankee stacks came in higher owned than we projected them to be on FanDuel. And I think the primary reason why that happened is because there were two basically like really egregious pricing mistakes on FanDuel, specifically in the Yankees lineup. Andujar was 2K batting 6th with a great overall average projection. And Giancarlo Stanton was batting 2nd at 2.7. This one almost feels worse to me. And we projected these guys to be pretty highly owned. But what you miss in this kind of ownership projection here, or what it doesn't pick up enough of, is that people building with a traditional optimizer and just forcing in a 4-stack, in this case on FanDuel, they're not only going to get a ton of these guys because they're projected so well on average, because that optimizer has to build a 4-stack in every lineup, it's going to give you a ton of all of the other Yankees. And the Yankees were like seriously just like sky high owned yesterday. I think partially because of that, because everybody out there, going in saying, build me my 4-stacks, traditional optimizer, average projections, just got a ton of Yankees. You would have probably picked up on that by doing what I just described here, where you build like cash lineups with a 4-stack rule, because of how well those two guys were and how much, I guess Donaldson actually was pretty cheap too at 2.4, how much exposure people were getting there. So, okay. Let's see, a couple more questions. Eamon said, I totally forgot about this. What's up, Jordan? I lost the Aaron nickname since I still haven't tackled Monday's question. Monday's question is the one, if I remember correctly, this is still the one, somebody asking me to review the week 1 slate for NFL.
Ouch, you lost the air.
I lost the air nickname. Okay, maybe we'll do this one real quickly here. But let me answer the question that's actually written here first. How do I enter 150 lineups on DK without a lineup? It's easy on FanDuel, but can't figure it out on DK. So as far as I'm aware, at least on a computer, you have to at least put a dummy in. I just do it on my phone on the app most of the time. You can just like click the contest and then reserve a number of just blank lineups. So I always do all of my contest entry.
I do it the same way.
Yeah. I think, it's not that much harder on a computer. My DraftKings is still messed up for on this laptop too. I don't know why. You'll see it in a second here. There we go. Gets all weird. It's not that much harder. I mean, you just throw in one dummy lineup and then bulk enter all the other contests. I think the easiest thing to do is to just do it on your phone on the app, because then you can just say like 150 in this contest, boom, done, 20, done, 3, done, and just roll through it like that. So that I think is the easiest way to do it there. But okay, let's real quickly here. What was this question? This was, I think this was Rogue here that asked the question, right? And it was basically just to do like a review of the week 1 slate. Let's see. All right, let me pull this up. So I guess I'll kind of give like a quick overview of what I did basically here. So the first thing that I was looking at when I went through here is I did a little bit of trimming of the bottom of my player pool for week 1. Just a lot of guys down here. Let's see, especially for the like skill position players, that I just didn't want to be getting exposure to. So I had mentioned this last week, but what I did is I went and basically found kind of the last player on this list that I thought like had some legitimate upside. And I ended up thinking that number was around 6 points ish. I was interested in guys like Kenneth Gainwell, interested in Garrett Wilson, interested in Wan'Dale Robinson. They were kind of the last players for me that I wanted to get some exposure to. So I set a projection filter to limit just the skill position players to actually around 6 points. Only play players that are greater than 6 points. Andy talked about this on the video he put out on Saturday. He does this in a little bit of a different way, where he's instead saying, I don't want to play any player that's like not even at least 3% projected owned, because if the field doesn't even think they're worth playing that much, then I don't want to play them. This, I think, kind of does a similar job of trimming the player pool here. I just did it with projections instead. that's kind of like the main thing that I did on the projections tab. I didn't really like mess with too much else. Andrew, for your NFL process, anything that you're doing with your player pool or team totals or anything like that?
I like to look at the like 95th percentile, and sometimes I'll just sort by that and exclude by that. So it's like, all right, if your 95th percentile isn't like 10 points, like I don't want to see it. And that's like anywhere from 10 to 15 for me. So usually closer to 15, and it looks like we end up like kind of like a similar range. But like even like Brian Edwards and like is like borderline.
Yeah. I agree. And I think, so honestly, one of the things that I really want us to add is just a filter by 95th percentile. You can filter by all these wonderful things, but there are no filtering by percentiles, which I think would be super useful. I use the percentiles as a big input to that as well, to kind of give me an idea of where I want to be there. So
yeah, we're going to take that back to the team.
Yeah. When it comes to actually then building my lineups, mostly I'll work with the default settings here. I like to set a stacking rule. I think it just makes that pool a little bit better ahead of time. So I mentioned this again recently. The main thing that I'm looking to do is just make sure that I'm, one, playing a stack in every lineup, and two, limiting myself from getting those like super big mega stacks. This is almost always my go-to stack rule. I will also, just on the other side of this, just limit myself from getting like way too like big of a run back on the other side. Doesn't happen that often, but a little thing that I like to do here. Do you set any stacking rules or do anything in the build settings there?
Looking at my pool without stacking rules, I haven't seen anything so far that like makes me feel like it's needed. But if it is, I will set something similar to what you're doing.
Gotcha. Cool. And I think that's probably like the best overall approach is, run the build first, and see what you need. So yeah, I think that's better practice. One thing I wanted to ask actually your stance on, because this is another thing that I get asked all the time, and it's something that I don't do a lot of. Do you ever touch the min unique slider or the setting? Are you interested in forcing like inter lineup diversity with uniques?
Especially for diversifiers, no. If I'm playing like maybe 3 lineups, like that like almost never happens. But like if I'm playing like 3 lineups, maybe I will put it that way. That way my pool is just a little more diversified out the gate, because I don't want to play a lineup with one unique, and like it would be like a elevator essentially.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And I've talked about that a little bit before as well. Like I try to think about my elevators as how, like, what's the maximum diversity I can get between these lineups, because you're playing so few of them. Like if you're just playing 5 single entry and 3 maxes, there's almost certainly like, I would be very rare for me to play the same stack in all 5 of those lineups, because there's almost certainly much more diversity you can get and sacrifice virtually no EV across like a 5 lineup sample.
Right. And I think I'm less likely to do that in football. It was more like baseball. Like, okay, this one stack is like clearly 5 stack, far and away the best team. Like, and I'm building 3 lineups. Maybe I'll set a 2.
Gotcha.
But it's rare. I don't use it very often.
Okay. Yeah, it's something it's something that hasn't been a part of my process very much before. But I think there is a case for it. I'm maybe a little bit more interested in at least just like experimenting with some builds with min uniques at like 2 or 3, just to see what's coming on there. But we'll let this build here. Talk a little bit about the things that I was looking at here in my exposures for week 1. I mentioned yesterday that, again, I was pretty heavy on Chiefs. They were probably my overall most popular stack. The main reason why for me is I was just consistently seeing this like big tier difference between like Chiefs players and anyone else at virtually every position, right? When I'm talking about a tier difference, I'm basically talking about like mostly my pool exposure, where, the field is basically saying, yeah, like Mahomes, like this is the best game environment, but it's close to a lot of these other game environments. SaberSim is telling you like, no, this is clearly the elite play. This is the premier stack to use for this week. And even though they were the highest projected owned guys, I just got to a ton of exposure here. I did manage my risk a bit. Again, thinking, if the best overall stack on the slate, that quarterback is only featured 30% of the time, do I need 60%? I can still get 3x the field by going 30%. This is basically kind of how I approached it. But I was well over the field on Mahomes, Kelsey, most of the other players in this offense. What were you looking at in the exposures and the post-build stuff week one?
Yeah, I was getting to a lot of Aaron Jones.
Okay.
And Kelsey as well. But I definitely was a little careful with my exposure. And then one thing I always try to do is I try to always make exposure adjustments from this all tab.
Yeah, really good point. And the reason why that's important here is when you're editing a player in a given positional tab. So if you edit your running back exposure, you're only editing that player's exposure when he's used in that position. And obviously with the flex spot, there's a little bit more, there's more ways to roster those players than that. So what I would recommend, and I know this is a little bit confusing. We actually just talked about this morning about a way we can improve this. But what I'd recommend, if you want to look at your running backs, for example, just search running back. That'll pull up all of your running back exposure, and it'll show you the total exposure you have to that player in both the running back and flex spots, which I think can be really helpful here. So one other thing.
That's a great way to look at it as well.
Yeah. One other thing I want to quickly mention here is within the stacks. So one thing that I will also do is, since I'm allowing QB plus threes, essentially 4 stacks, right, in my pool, is I will do a little bit of spot checking here to make sure that I'm happy with the teams that are showing up. If you're ever unsure, if you should be happy with the teams that are showing up there, one thing that I think can help is to just actually go and look at the lineups. But I will do a little bit of cleanup here. If, Pittsburgh and Jacksonville are teams that stand out to me of do I really want a Mitch Trubisky plus 3 stack? And I'll go through and spot check these and decide if I want to keep them in my pool. Last week, I preferred to limit my QB plus 3s to only teams that I really thought had the potential to make that kind of construction viable, which was basically something similar to this. I can't remember if I ended up actually taking Cincinnati QB plus 3s with me into my builds, but actually, you know what? No, it was the Vikings. I'm almost positive I eliminated the Vikings here, which maybe I shouldn't have, but I just had a hard time seeing how Kirk Cousins plus 3 pass catchers gets there as the optimal stack. So that was one I had also eliminated there. And basically played this portfolio of QB plus 3 stacks. So anything else you wanted to add? Anything else a part of your, I know that was kind of a quick overview. I apologize that this kind of got tacked on to the end of an office hours here today, but at least we got to this question. Heading into week 2, maybe on Friday or maybe tomorrow's stream, we could do a little bit more of this kind of thing, but more proactively. The one thing I just I don't spend a ton of time researching my past lineups, I think sometimes time is better spent looking ahead to the next slate anyway, as opposed to going back to the previous one. So might be kind of fun for us on tomorrow or Friday stream to do a bit of a breakdown of the upcoming week 2 slate, talk about some of the things that we're seeing there. We could even talk about Showdown tomorrow for the Thursday night game a little bit there.
Yeah, that'll be fun. There's a little Showdown breakdown.
Cool. All right. Well, we will go ahead and leave it there for today. I think, I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything coming in at the last second while we were doing that, but looks good. Andrew and I will both be back here again tomorrow. Oh, just in time. My camera dies. We'll be back again here tomorrow, 2:00 Eastern for another office hours. Appreciate everybody that tuned in, watched, asked questions, participated here today. Thank you, Andrew, for day 1 on office hours with me. And
thanks for the warm welcome, everybody.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. See ya.